Charlie Brewster had such a tough time staking his claim to the discovery of a genuine urban vampire on Fright Night in 1985 that when Microdeal won the license to produce a spin-off Amiga game, they decided not to even attempt it. In fact, they assumed it would be such a pain in the neck they turned the cliched play as the good guy trope on its head. Embodying the blood-sucking neighbour from hell, Jerry Dandridge, we're tasked with traipsing through our house of horrors, sinking dripping fangs into the local residents to sustain our fragile life force. Goal-wise, it's all geared towards staying alive for 7 days, retiring to Jerry's coffin slumber pit each morning as soon as the sun rises to avoid being liquefied into a steaming ooze of green pus. Well, you've got to take care of your complexion, haven't you? Day 1 begins at a leisurely pace, ushered in by a comedic rendition of There's No Place Like Home, with few wannabe vampire slayers to tackle. Don't get too comfortable though, the easy ride won't last long. Before you can say, would you mind not ramming that crucifix up my nose, all and sundry are ramming crucifixes up your nose and dousing you with a concoction of holy water and garlic, as David Whittaker's Death March ditty accompanies the bloodshed. Charlie even ropes in erstwhile celluloid vampire hunter and Fright Night TV show host Peter Vincent to shine a light on proceedings, because a horror movie actor is bound to be an expert in vampirology. He is, as it turns out, which is handy. As the movie teaches us, those of faith, in the power of their ability to vanquish the undead using the traditional tools, not God, make much more effective assassins. Represented by a lighter coloured pentagram in the status bar, this belief grows with the passage of time until the pesky meddling cast become real forces to be reckoned with. If you can reach and survive day 7, you're rewarded with a swift return back to square one with no conclusion. Perhaps coder Steve Back assumed no one would ever make it that far, so the omission wouldn't matter. That or the game was never truly finished, for reasons we'll get to later. For fans of the movie, it was a bit of a disappointment, notwithstanding Pete Lyons' exceptional graphics, witty animation, and the wonderfully eerie soundtrack composed by David Whittaker. A tedious, shallow, repetitive affair with little flesh on the bone to justify its arcade game assertions. CU Amiga went a step further, including Fright Night in their list of the most abysmal Amiga games of all time, an article you'll find in their 1994 buyer's guide. Here comes the quotey bit. The roll call of calamities includes such gems as Fright Night, Moonwalker, Jaws, Pink Panther and the Munsters, pathetic one and all. Of these, Microdeal's Fright Night must get a special mention, as it was obscenely awful in almost every respect. The actual Fright Night films are fairly enjoyable affairs, but the game was a travesty. Written by industry veteran Steve Back, it involved guiding a huge, apparently tiptoeing vampire sprite through a sprawling mansion, jumping on people and sucking their blood, and, well, that's it basically. Fright Night was set within a 6-room house, and all the player had to do was pounce on the unfortunates wandering around it. Just to add a little variety to the proceedings, bats attacked the main sprite every now and then, which is odd as the hero was a vampire in the first place, and the only real goal was to score as many points as possible by biting people before your energy expired. Of course, the only verdict to really count is that of the amigos, Aaron and John. Luckily, they covered this one in podcast episode 14. You'll find a remastered version of it on YouTube, complete with video footage. Despite development work commencing on the Atari ST, as fate would have it, only an Amiga version materialised due to the data crunching constraints of the former. A slideshow preview is all that remains to evidence the initial progress made. Somehow I think Atari owners had a fortunate escape when this one slipped through the net. These preview images are nowhere to be found online, so I dredged up the Atari ST magazine cover disc they originally appeared on, and braved the world of Linux-based Atari emulation to capture them for myself. Getting Atari installed was easy enough, though as with UAE, it didn't come with the operating system. Bizarrely, I first had to enable root access in order to place a separately acquired TOS image in the emulator's folder, before it could be booted. With that mini hurdle leaped, Atari was as straightforward to use as WinUAE or FSUAE. Sadly, it emerged that no gameplay screenshots had been included in the Fright Night slideshow, only a small selection of what appears to be title screen material. Following the breadcrumb trail, seeking answers led me to ST Amiga Format magazine issue 7. In January 1989, they reported, according to Microdeal Games programmer Steve Goldrunner, Jupiter Probe, Leathernex, etc. back, Fright Night isn't coming out on the ST. The problem is that the game requires several huge sprites to be animated. The ST can't cope with this, so the game will only be released on the Amiga. A month later, issue 8 of ST Amiga Format featured an interview with the former miner himself. Currently I'm working on my last game, Fright Night. This one I'm doing only on the Amiga. It started off on the ST in the summer of '87. Microdeal decided they wanted the game for the Amiga first, and as good as possible, so I'm using 32 colour backgrounds with large sprites, 100 by 64 pixels, animating at 25 Hz. I don't fancy converting this to the ST, it would be a virtual rewrite, so I shall pass it on to someone who will enjoy the challenge, hopefully Tim Purvis in the US. This wasn't to be the only unfulfilled promise on Microdeal's part where Fright Night is concerned. Initially they were planning to release an adjunct to the arcade game, an adventure-based movie tie-in title. While this was alluded to in magazine adverts and preview articles, it never emerged for either of the proposed platforms. An adventure player's nightmare, or a dream. This fully mouse-driven adventure gives you screen after screen of competitive adventuring with gem-style multi-option dialogue boxes and digitised sound, programmed using our new Tailspin adventure development system. Gem is the GUI layer devised by Digital Research that was built into the Atari's operating system, TOS, while Tailspin is an adventure game development package published by Mictron, also known as Microdeal, and written by Mark Heaton. So now you know. In August 1988, Ace magazine took the bait, reporting in issue 11 that Steve's future projects include an Amiga arcade adventure for Microdeal based on the cult horror comedy video Fright Night. ST Amiga format in issue 6, published in December 1988, followed up the story, printing a preview of the anticipated upcoming titles. Fright Night is actually two games, the arcade and the adventure game. The adventure is a gem-style mouse and menu game giving you screen after screen of competitive adventuring and digitised mayhem. Lurching ahead to April 1989, the adventure game had yet to crawl out of Microdeal's coffin, prompting New Computer Express in issue 23 to write, "Fright Night? Confused? I know I am. Doubtless you've heard plenty about Microdeal's computer version of Fright Night. You're probably aware that it isn't coming out on the ST, as programmer Steve Back wants to head a development team rather than pump out code himself. Well, you'll be surprised to hear that Fright Night is coming out on the ST, however it won't be like the arcade game recently released for the Amiga. Instead it will be Fright Night the adventure game. Amiga owners will really be in for a hard time as Fright Night will be available in both arcade and adventure format. With Steve Back missing in action since 2011, I decided to contact Pete Lyon to find out if he could shed any light on the adventuring no-show. Before doing so, however, I spotted that someone had already beaten me to the punch, and sadly, Pete couldn't help. Again, I cannot recall, I just tried to summon up as many of the tropes of the horror movie I felt were expected. There were fewer restrictions on the graphics, especially as I was now able to approach more figuratively realistic figures. This kept me happy, and I think at this point I was just left to get on with it. That was an extract from an article entitled The Pete Lyon Interview by Ross Silliphant, also known as Chrysalid. It was published on the Grumpy Old Gamers website on October 5th, 2015, however has now been eviscerated by a restructure. Despite the apparent dead end, I did take the opportunity to ask Pete if he's still in touch with Steve or knows where I might find him. Alas no, they parted company decades ago. During the Computing Glory years, Pete alluded to their odd chalk and cheese partnership when queried on how the much revered Dream Team found themselves working together, so perhaps it's not surprising that there was little to maintain the bond once their career paths deviated. My best guess is that Steve abandoned the Fright Night adventure game project due to objections over the way he was treated by Microdeal. Maybe they put the second title on hold and in the wake of the arcade game's reception decided not to revive it with a substitute coder. Splashing the names of Pete and Steve across the box cover was often all it took to sell a game. In this case, however, the bad press appears to have outweighed the prestige of the authors. I can't find any evidence that Fright Night made a dent in the game sales charts in any form. That said, the movie wasn't a massive success at the box office either, generating a modest $24.9 million. It has since gone on to become a cult classic, with 2 remakes on the roster, one of them a Bollywood musical. As of 2013, even the remake has a sequel. Craig Gillespie's 2011 retread is notable mostly because it stars Anton Yelchin and Colin Farrell as Charlie and Jerry respectively. Oh, and David Doctor Who Tennant as Peter Vincent doing an impression of Russell Brand. That's certainly a sight to behold. Anton passed away at the tender age of 27 in 2016. He survived a blood-curdling, slathering onslaught from the undead representatives of Unholy Hell, only to be crushed to death by his own Jeep as it rolled down the driveway to his Californian home. Its follow-up, Fright Night 2, New Blood, was released directly to DVD and digital media in 2013, starring a cast of low-profile actors. There's not a whole lot worth mentioning aside from Jerry is now Jerry with an I at the end, a sexy female vampire who lectures on Romanian history in her spare time. Recognising how vapid it was turning out to be, director Edward Rodriguez took every opportunity to glam it up with nudity, sex, strippers, and pretty vacuous teenagers. At least Charlie's best friend Evil Ed Bates was well cast, as he's equally as irritating as he was in the original movie. In an article published in ST Amiga format issue 8 in February 1989 entitled Back to the Future, with no C in back, Steve reveals that working for Microdeal wasn't exactly a bed of roses with cherries on top. Reading between the lines, this goes some way to explaining the lamentable fate of the second licensed Fright Night gaming spin-off. In the early days I preferred to work, like most programmers, at night. Nowadays, with my own office, I do things differently. I think most people would agree that my output is fairly prolific. In 1987 I completed 7 games, in 1988 I completed 9. I've also earned a great deal of money, but at a price. I now work around 80 hours a week, drinking coffee and coke constantly. I smoke around 50 cigarettes a day and get drunk every night. Not an ideal lifestyle for a diabetic on insulin. I've had a good time as a programmer, but now is the time to quit. Fright Night will be my last game, at least under these conditions. What does the future hold? Well, I could buy an ice cream van. Selling ice cream in the summer sounds like a nice job. Perhaps I might open a fish and chip shop in Paris. There is a third possibility, which at the moment sounds the most plausible. I may well start a 16-bit software development house. Steve and Microdeal did go their separate ways as promised. Programming, on the contrary, was in his blood. Steve immediately went on to code Spitting Image for Domark and the Sentry, also known as Sentinel, for Firebird, before founding his own company, Vector Dean. There he worked with Chris Sorrell to produce the James Pond series, along with Bad Company, Dogs of War and Yolanda. Around 1995, Steve joined British console developer Eurocom, and remained with them until they became defunct in December 2012, following the enforced redundancy of its 250 employees, ending an impressive 24-year tenure in the industry. During his time with Eurocom, he worked on a diverse array of titles for various platforms, including Disney Universe, Rio, Dead Space Extraction, The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, Disney Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, Athens, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Crash Bash, Disney's Tarzan, Disney's Hercules, and Spot Goes to Hollywood. Steve is now enjoying his hard-earned retirement in Derby, so will hopefully have time to get back to me and shine some vampire-slaying, glaring sunlight on his spooky horror game that wasn't. I'll reserve this space for cracking open the web-encrusted, dusty tomb of the missing in action title, fingers and toes crossed with a 4-leaf clover on top. In the meantime, please breathe normally, as we can't be held liable for your asphyxiation. This interview's got as much potential to come to fruition as Kevin Spacey's future career.
The world is a van.